Hello my friends and welcome. Today we're going to speak about the Russian losses and whether those influence the outcome of the war, whether Ukraine is capable to stop finally, Russian army on the Ukrainian front lines and basically force Putin to ceasefire. Not what he says like Ukraine should give up Donbass and just surrender, but no, physically stop the Russian army. Well, it seems like definitely with a proper organization, Ukraine could be close even to that point. Why? Well, all about it in this video. Let's go. I monitor not just our OSINT analytics, those who review the Ukrainian war from the Western perspective and from a Ukrainian one, but I also check out the information that Russia feeds their own people, their official propaganda, what Russian defense ministers say, and also Russian military bloggers. For Russia, as the government, as the state, it is after all very hard to establish the control over every sort of the military influencer. They are capable to create some sort of the bubble for their specific audience. And to maintain the audience engaged, the Russian military bloggers, they'll have to tell sometimes the truthful information to rise up their credibility relative to the Russian official propaganda. That's why they're quite not okay with what Gerasimov is saying. Plus, sometimes they may disrespect those Russian influencers who share the open Russian fake narratives. Like, for example, around 2 days ago, Gerasimov once again said that Kupiansk is under the Russian control, and Ukraine, just with the help of the drones, delivered some of the Ukrainian flags and some of the buildings and water towers. But we understand that it's all hoax, and not just we understand it. Also, Russian military bloggers are saying about it. They say that Gerasimov is a bullshitter. He treats us as no one, delivering absolute nonsense and hiding the real Russian losses, not just the losses among soldiers or vehicles, tanks, whatsoever, but also the losses of the settlements, of villages and towns and cities in case of Kupiansk. Because Kupiansk is big, even compared to Bakhmut. But in Bakhmut, Russia had kind of the capable private army of Wagner. With the regular soldiers, they cannot achieve the same result. Well, at least not that fast. That's why the fights for Kupiansk, for example, they continue for already almost 2 years. For 2 years, Russia is incapable even to get Synkivka under control. That's the village in the northeastern outskirt of Kupiansk that potentially might open the way for the Russian army to straightforward attack Kupiansk itself. With that vector and with the vector they previously organized from Moskovka, yes, Russians potentially might have the chance. But with lonely attack, also using this pipeline tactics that wasn't covered by Ukraine at the proper time, Russians just lost it. Not just Russian generals, together with Putin, lied openly to us, to everyone, first of all to Russians, that they occupied Kupiansk, but they also used the same tactics in which they accuse the Ukrainian army right now, putting all of those flags inside the city, using infiltration attacks with 1, maximum 2 soldiers. The idea of this tactic is just to show that, oh, we put the Russian flag here. But de facto, Russians were not capable to establish control over Kupiansk, and that in its turn led to the encirclement of the Russian armed forces. And still, there are some of the enclaves, but they're very small. So Ukraine is very successful, but still Russia delivers this wrong information. However, sometimes some of the Russian military bloggers, they tell the real information as it is. Yes, it happens. And not just they say about Ukrainian counteroffensive actions, which are successful in many of the cases, but also they tell about tremendous losses in the Russian military. Just 3 days ago, I checked out the biggest Russian military channel. Yeah, the guy is bullshitter. I think his surname is Podolaka. But he told that Russia could have lost more than 400,000 men totally KIA since the start of the war, and that the total calculated losses for the Russian army could be 1.5 million soldiers. Just imagine this number, 1.5 million. Then the last time I checked the Russian opposition sources, they were saying something around 230,000 confirmed cases. I mean, real surname, real name, particular military branch of the soldier and where it is buried. This information is taken officially from Russia, from all of those archives. The data is being collected after the funerals, which are happening in Russia. But imagine how many of the Russian soldiers were not still buried in Russia. So the figure could be 2 times more at least. Other Russian military bloggers, they do their own calculation. They calculate how many forces Russian army had by the time of the intervention to Ukraine back in 2022. They also plus mobilized soldiers, roughly 300,000. And each year Russia takes 420,000 soldiers to its army, more and more. And the final figure right now of the soldiers in Ukraine is 700,000, roughly. So they ask the question, where 1.5 million soldiers have gone? So the numbers are pretty much the same, and they match the statistics, not just Ukrainian statistics, but the worst possible one. Ukraine calculates the Russian losses based on how many persons could be in one or other vehicle if the vehicle is being kaputted. So for example, if the crew is maximum 8 persons on board, Ukraine divides that number by 2, and okay, you have the statistics. And also then we have the drone video confirmation or some of the footage. They also plus that number, and each day Russia loses roughly 1,000 soldiers, KA together with wounded personnel. This number is just astonishing. Nowhere after the Second World War there were so tremendous losses for a single army. Russian army lost definitely more than 1 million soldiers. Strangely, but Russian population is quite okay with that, mainly because Russia mobilizes their army men just voluntarily. Yeah, sometimes they push those conscripts also to sign contracts with the Russian army. They push alcoholics, they push prisoners to join the war. And by the way, the Russian private armies are aside of the statistics, like for example, Russian Storm Z or Wagner army. Wagner army is now dispersed mainly among the standard Russian army. Some of the mercenaries, they're still in Africa even, but mainly Wagner ceased its existence. So what's special about those losses? Losses and losses, we all knew that Russia has those, but they still continue to fight. But you know guys, before I have never seen those figures coming from the Russian side. Never ever Russian military bloggers told this real information about definitely Russian losses, and the way how they describe it, how they also blame the Russian official propaganda, because they say, I mean Russian Defense Ministry, according to their official statistics, Russia lost 5,900 with something soldiers. Just imagine, 5,900, not 59,000, not 590,000. 5,900. It's not even 100 times less than the real Russian losses, but Russia continued to feed this propaganda to people, saying that Ukraine lost 1.5 million. Russia tells that Ukraine lost that number. Just imagine the Ukrainian population and the Russian one. Ukraine wasn't capable to mobilize that number of the people, of course. Plus Russians are saying that Ukraine lost 4,000 of the tanks just for the Kursk operation alone. 4,000 tanks and BMPs, let's be like that, heavy armored vehicles, 4,000. This is nonsense, and Putin himself told that Ukraine lost 15,000 or 50,000 of the vehicles. And that bullshit information, of course, raises the questions among Russian society that something is wrong. And the only place where Russians may check out more or less real information is from some of the Russian bloggers, occasionally. Sometimes they tell the real information again, sometimes. Mostly they spread some of the lies, so we need to figure out that they lie and then they tell truth. But again, never ever I heard the conversation about those Russian losses from the Russian channels before, like that, blaming the Russian military command for incompetence, blaming Russian political management for misleading the people and making the war, let's say, not successful and useless in a way. Yeah, just for you to understand, Russian Z bloggers, they're not our friends even close. Their goal is to boost Russian military to achieve the goals of the special military operation, but in another more harsh way. They're calling to use nukes, massive mobilization, whatsoever. And they're really disappointed that the Russian society is so volatile, that many Russian men are escaping conscript service and unwilling to join the Russian army to liberate Russia in Ukraine. That is what they want, and that's why they complain. That it goes not according to plan. Strelkov, you might remember him, Girkin, he is now in the Russian prison. Well, he says the same stuff, that Russia is losing this war. Russia cannot sustain those losses for extensive period of time. And definitely this year will be decisive for Putin, what he might do with the Russian army. Because if he continues to do what he does, well, he might just run out of those volunteers, of the Russian men basically, who joined the Russian army voluntarily, who live in poverty, who have lots of the debts, and the only solution for them is to get a couple of the millions from the Russian budget if they put their signature on the contract to join and go and flatline themselves in Ukraine. We see that Putin is still afraid to announce this new massive mobilization in Russia, but probably he will not have the other option. And it could be the end, like not the end, I would say, but very, very risky for Putin's regime to sustain itself. Because Putin is not just alone, Putin has his own circle. And that circle, I would say, they start to understand that Putin is leading the wrong way, that this war cannot continue just like that forever, and that at least it should be stopped. Lots of those people, they have their property confiscated, their assets frozen in European banks, in the banks of the United States. They're in desperate, actually, all of those oligarchs. However, the close Putin circle, it's not about oligarchs. Well, maybe the guys like Sechin, who is the owner of Rosneft, that went under the sanctions, by the way, he is in this close Putin circle, but Putin surrounded himself by ex-KGB agents, or FSB mafia, I call it. Russian FSB, they took power, I would say, in late 90s, after Boris Yeltsin resigned. Putin was this candidate from the Russian intelligence apparatus, and they even organized explosions of the Russian houses, blaming Chechens and saying that they need a strong leader nowadays, vote for Putin. He wasn't popular at the beginning in 1990s, but FSB did everything to create this sort of the image of the competent leader, very strong one, who is capable to finish the war in Chechnya. And definitely Putin finished that war by flatlining lots of the cities, including the capital city of Chechnya, Grozny. Later on, putting Kadyrov in power and rebuilding Grozny partially, but Putin just cannot return all of those lives, and Chechnya turned to the local dictatorship, double dictatorship I would call it, Russian and Kadyrov one. By the way, about Kadyrov, I forgot to mention in my latest video from the studio, it seems like he is more or less okay. Well, he's still not looking great, but the video of him was shared and he was driving the car, but his reaction was weaker than Joe Biden's. Yeah, Putin forced Chechens to fight against Ukraine, you see. They do not fight that much compared to the Russian army, but Putin wants Ukraine. He wants Ukrainian infrastructure, resources, even the Ukrainian population, people, to be used to fuel the Russian economy, to be used to fight for the Russian army in the future wars. That was mainly the goal of Putin, one of the goals of this special military operation, but we see that it is unachievable. Russia also has tremendous demographic problem as well as Ukraine. So Putin would like, of course, to refuel his country and occupy territories with more people. But what they do on the front lines, basically flatlining all of those cities, villages, you see that no one would live there in those ruined buildings. That means that Russia is not interested in those territories. So the idea for Russia is to share the destruction, to terrorize people, and to force Ukraine basically to surrender. That's their strategy, also was in the Second Chechen War. Then Putin was elected as a president of Russia for the first time, and this curse still continues for more than 20 years, of course. How many years? 25, yeah, already 25. Crazy. One more issue Russian military bloggers continue to say is that less and less volunteers are willing to join the Russian army. Before there were queues, especially then there was the wave, then the payments were skyrocketed to 5 million, 6 million rubles. Many Russians went to those particular areas, like for example Moscow region, or it was in Belgorod region. There were definitely queues, and because of the stagflation of the Russian economy, those regions, they cannot fulfill their promises any longer. So now they start to postpone the payments for the Russian men who signed the contracts. Before it was right away, you sign and you get the money almost right away in a few days. But now it might take several weeks. And what are the several weeks for the Russian soldier? He could be flatlined in a matter of days. The training in the Russian camps usually takes not more than 2 weeks. And sometimes Russian soldiers miraculously appear on the front lines just days after they were mobilized or after they signed the contract. Well, because mobilization in Russia is after all not that popular, Putin tries to circumnavigate unpopular decision to openly announce this mobilization. The last year he already signed a decree that applies for this year to call reservists for the military drills. This is some sort of the unique feature. It has never been used even in the Soviet Union. I know that many of the countries, they call reservists to join army once a year. For example, it is like that in Switzerland. I guess for 1 or 2 weeks they're going for regular military training until they reach some certain age, 40 with something years, from what I know, or I guess. Here I don't want to mislead you, but this program has never been introduced in Russia or, as I told you, in Soviet Union. This is some unique feature, and something tells me that if those reservists will go and join some of the regular training, they'll be proposed to sign the contract with the Russian Federation Army, and they'll be sent to Ukraine. So maybe that is the variant for Putin to get more army men this year without this full-scale mobilization. But again, it's just postponing of the problem. Russia physically is unable to reach the goal of the special military operation in Ukraine with those crazy losses, with the Ukrainian counteroffensive actions. And I'm very happy that we have the new defense minister. He already announced that there will be reforms in the Ukrainian army. Those are long waited and needed just right now. And I'm sure that even with limited military support coming from our allies, Ukraine is capable to stop Russia. And this year will be the decisive one. Russia bogged down, and we already see it. Weather also plays in favor of Ukraine right now, this winter, cold winter time in Ukraine. Just recall summer and autumn of the last year, especially autumn, how Russia boosted its attack operations in attempt to get Pokrovsk under control, propelled to Gulaipole, Zaporizhia direction, Kupiansk, everywhere. Konstantinovka, by the way, where they are absolutely not successful. And now if you open the map and if you scroll down by few weeks ago, you would see that Russia is unable to reach its goals. All of this offensive action led to tremendous losses. Lots of the vehicles. In Dobropilya, this counteroffensive was cut by Ukraine. Russia lost so many vehicles, and I already tired to tell about those convoy attacks. And I see how desperate Putin is, together with Gerasimov, how they try to change those commanders of Pokrov's direction, of how they appointed this butcher, Sohrab Akhmedov, who flatlined even more Russian soldiers together with the vehicles, and they saw, oh fuck, what have we done? We need to dismiss him immediately, we need to appoint the new commander, and now there will be someone else. By the time I'm recording this video, there is no constant commander of Pokrov's direction, the most important for the Russian army. It all shows that it's not going according to plan, absolutely. Plus, Ukraine has started to build those tremendously huge, wide defense lines. So how potentially Russia may even penetrate those? There is no variant. Even if they somehow do it with absolutely crazy losses, there will be the other defense line and another one and so on. So how many soldiers Russia is going to waste to occupy the entire Donbass, for example? It is not even 100,000 soldiers could be wasted, could be more. And we already see the impact of the Russian society. Russian military bloggers, they're in shock. Russian society, they see all of those cemeteries. Every family is affected, or they know someone who is affected by the loss, by disability. The Russian society is changing little by little, and it has never been like that before. It's a good sign. A sign that Putin will be forced to stop this war, and maybe it might happen in the next couple of years. And for Ukraine, it is kind of profitable because Ukraine has, I wouldn't say similar problems. Ukraine has less of the soldiers and resources, and Ukraine has unstable support from our allies. First of all, from the United States of America. After new elections, you see what happened. 1 year almost, or zero support from the United States. Just the remains of the Biden's packages were delivered, and now it's all up to Europeans to finance Ukrainian military support via Pearl program and also with their own military production manufacturing. Plus, the Russian society, I would say, it is getting concerned about Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure, because sometimes Russia uses the air defense that somehow hits the Russian buildings, or they intercept Ukrainian drones which fly also to the buildings. And all the time Russians are filming those videos with surprises. Oh, what is happening? What have we done? And they compare what they see outside their windows with what they see from their propaganda TV, and something is not matching, you know. And after all, they go and check the same military bloggers, Russian ones, and they see those tremendous losses, and they are shocked. What the hell is happening? Yeah, for now Russians are more or less calm, but it's already understandable that they do not support this special military operation. So Putin physically, even if he wanted it so much, cannot continue this war forever. He is determined for now to continue it. He is not willing to stop, but it is the situation for now. If he is pressed that much, he might think to stop. Not to slow down, but the ceasefire. And after this ceasefire, then Ukraine prepares all of the defense lines, and maybe some of the European partners will deploy their forces in Ukraine. Putin might not have any sort of the chance to win, even if he prepares his army fully. The idea for Putin in this war back in February 2022 was to occupy Ukraine very fast. That's why basically it's called the special military operation, because the planning was done to occupy Kyiv, the main portions, main cities of Ukraine, and that's it. It wasn't planned as the war of attrition. And after it, Putin changed his philosophy. He started to cooperate with China, North Korea, but that help is not infinite either. We see that China helps Russia, but not as much as it potentially may. Plus, the beginning of this year shows that the situation in the world for dictators, it's not great. Also, Trump's actions are unpredictable, even for the Russian Federation. Yeah, Trump blames Ukraine here and there. Zelensky is not willing for ceasefire, for negotiations. But after some time, 2 weeks, as Donny likes to say, they're getting along with Zelensky, and now it's Putin who is not willing to ceasefire. So the actions are matter, and the actions of the United States, they're pretty much okay this year, at least, with all of those tankers, with sanctions applied on some of the Russian companies. And I hope that they will apply even more sanctions, secondary ones, on those very crucial refineries that continue to operate with the Russian oil. And you might ask me, oh Dennis, you said about the Russian losses, maybe you also should mention Ukrainian losses. Yes guys, those losses are also huge. But the difference here that Ukraine is in defense, and after all, it's the war of drones, and Ukraine is not attacking with those convoys, or rarely has the infiltration tactics, sometimes using, sometimes not, but Russia is all the time in it, and those losses in Russian army, they're tremendous. I would say that in the first couple of years, Ukraine has 3 times less losses than Russia, because according to any sort of the war book, it's like that. You lose 3 times less than you are in defense. But now I guess the losses are 1 to 6, 1 to 8. At least if we trust some of the Ukrainian commanders, including Magyar, who say that it's roughly 1 to 8. Basically because of the drones and because Ukraine was capable to create the kill zone. the zone where all of the Russian movement is spotted and absolutely annihilated, whether those are tanks, BMPs, usual civilian vehicles, was Bukhanka vans, or Russian cavalry, guys on the horses. And that's why Russia basically bogged down, simply because of the drones. Without the drones, Russia would have occupied Ukraine till Dnipro River with all of those big cities of even Kharkiv. And Dnipro, of course, Zaporizhia. So drones, they do matter, and Ukraine mastered it. And now there are talks about the exchange of the Ukrainian drone technologies on some of that technologies coming from our allies. For example, Poland now is interested in supplying Ukraine some of the fighter jets, MiG-29s, as exchange for Ukrainian drone technologies, drone interceptors mainly, because Russia sent drones to Poland, and the effectiveness of Polish air defense in cooperation with other countries, it showed that it's not that effective. So based on this ratio information that I gave you, you may calculate the Ukrainian losses yourself, and they are pretty much high as for Ukrainian population. And for Ukraine, the life of every soldier is very important, it's very precious, unlike in Russia. In Russia, the life loss is nothing. They treat their own people as... I cannot even compare it to animals. It's crazy what is happening in the Russian army. I watched those videos of how they behave towards even mercenaries. Yeah, I remember that black guy with anti-tank mine in the front. It's very terrible. It's a barbarian army, really. And just imagine how they treat Ukrainian prisoners of war or Ukrainian people on occupied territories if they behave like that towards their own. Crazy. And my friends, especially those who support me on Patreon and membership of the channel, if you watch me on YouTube, thank you so much for it. My friends, you are making this job, my job, possible. I film videos every day, sometimes I publish 2 videos per day, and thank you so much again for motivating me for this job. And if you don't have this opportunity to support me on Patreon or membership, you may just press your like to the video and subscribe to the channel to boost video in algorithms. Thank you so much for it as well, and everything will be okay. No worries. We'll stay positive, and I see the signs that Russia is not doing well. And Putin, he has no chances for victory. It's 100%. Absolutely. See you around, guys. Ciao.